March 3rd, 1968, 2:47 a.m. The phone rang twice in a Harlem apartment that smelled of menthol and cheap cologne. Nicky Barnes answered on the second ring because only one man called that late and still expected you alive in the morning. Bumpy Johnson didn't greet him. He gave an address off Lennox, a floor number, and a rule: come alone. Then the line went dead. Nicky dressed without turning on the light, slid his revolver deeper in the drawer instead of into his coat, and walked out into the cold like a man going to church. The streetlights flickered. A bus sighed at the corner. Every sound felt recorded. He drove a plain, dark Chevy. No radio, no hurry, letting the city decide his heartbeat. At each red light, he watched mirrors, not traffic, and he remembered the missing $2 million sitting like a stone under his tongue. The walk-up staircase was narrow and warm, smelling of boiled cabbage, wet wool, and old arguments. A single bulb blinked over the third-floor landing. The door opened before he knocked. Inside, a lamp lit one chair, one table, and Bumpy Johnson seated in a crisp suit as if time obeyed him. Nicky started to speak. Bumpy raised one finger, and the room stopped with it. "No," Bumpy said. "Not yet." Nicky closed his mouth. Bumpy leaned forward, eyes steady, voice soft enough to make you listen harder. "You talk when I say you talk," he told him. "Tonight you get a gift. 1 minute. That's all. You tell me why you took my $2 million, and you tell me clean." He glanced at his watch. "When it ends, it ends." Nicky nodded once, feeling the air thicken, knowing anger would be easier than this calm arithmetic of power tonight. Nicky's throat went dry, but he didn't beg. He didn't even try a smile. He just said, "Before I answer, you need to know how it got this far." Bumpy's eyes narrowed. "Your minute's running," he warned. "I'm not stalling," Nicky said. "I'm explaining the math." Bumpy held up the watch again, then lowered it like a judge granting one exhibit. "Quick," he said. "Make it worth my patience." And that's the thing about Harlem in those years. The streets looked chaotic, but the real wars were spreadsheets nobody wrote down. Purity, routes, who touched what, who skimmed without leaving fingerprints. Nicky had seen a number so humiliating it made stealing feel like maintenance, not rebellion. A 10% number. A king's product reduced to noise. So the story snapped backward, fast, to a tiny bag in a quiet lab, where one man with glasses weighed truth carefully alone. Late January 1968, behind a beauty salon on 125th, a skinny chemist everyone called Doc set a sample on a glass plate. The back room smelled of hairspray and bleach, a fake cleanliness trying to hide dirty work. Doc didn't look like a gangster. That's why Nicky trusted him. Doc ran a quick test, frowned, then looked up like he was about to insult a dead man. 10, he said. 10%, maybe less. Nicky stared at the powder, then at document. "That's Bumpy's," he replied, more statement than question. Doc shook his head. "That's Bumpy's name, not Bumpy's standard. 10% meant too many hands, too many tolls, too many little thieves hiding inside a big legend." Nicky felt the cold click of opportunity, and under it, a colder fear. Weak product makes customers loud. Loud customers make cops hungry, and hungry cops don't negotiate. He walked out faster. He didn't run to Bumpy with that number. In Harlem, the messenger becomes the message, and bad news gets people buried. Instead, Nicky listened. He sat in Small's paradise without drinking, watched barbershops like they were stock tickers, and paid for rumors the way other men paid for dates. He learned who packed, who drove, which apartments stayed dark yet hosted visitors at odd hours. The pattern was ugly, a relay race of greed. Every middleman shaved weight and covered it by cutting harder. The pipeline was eating itself, and the king looked rich enough not to notice. Nicky didn't want Bumpy's throne. He wanted a clean machine beside it. To build it, he needed time and capital. Time to change routes without being seen. Capital to buy discipline. So he hunted the rolling reserve, the cash that kept the whole engine turning, and he found it through a man. The man was named Curtis, a cousin of a cousin who loved suits and hated paying for them. He owed money to everybody and loyalty to nobody, which made him useful and disposable. Nicky didn't threaten him. Threats made people noisy. He offered Curtis a clean slate and a quiet life, the kind you can't buy on a corner. Curtis's hand shook when he asked what it cost. Nicky leaned close and spoke like he was ordering coffee. One night, he said, "The wrong door stays unlocked, the wrong turn happens, and you forget you ever saw it." Curtis whispered Bumpy's name like a prayer. Nicky cut him off. "Bumpy's getting robbed already," he said. "I'm just moving the money where it'll stop leaking." Curtis agreed because breathing is persuasive, and within a week he gave Nicky the schedule of the rolling reserve. Dates, routes, and confidence that gets men careless. February 14th, 1968. Snow turned sidewalks into dirty glass as the rolling reserve moved in a black Lincoln. 3 men inside, bored by protection. They stopped at an old dentist's office with a faded sign, a place nobody watched because nobody cared. Nicky didn't hit them with guns. He hit them with timing. 2 blocks later, the Lincoln made a turn it had never made because the driver had been paid to be briefly stupid. At the next light, a delivery truck drifted wide and slow, blocking the lane without touching a bumper. 30 seconds. That was all. When the street cleared, the Lincoln was gone, and so was the cash. No shots, no screams, just absence. By the time the crew understood it wasn't bad luck, the money was already broken into smaller bundles, wrapped, and driven to 3 apartments. Nicky stared at the stacks, counting weeks, not dollars. With the cash hidden, Nicky built the line like a man wiring a bomb. Separate parts, no single point of failure. He rented 3 apartments under 3 names, one for product, one for money, one for meetings. He found a cut house where neighbors minded business for the right price, and he posted rules above the scale. Weigh twice, seal once, never improvise. Couriers used borrowed cars and carried 1 package per run. Routes changed daily. Each runner knew only his slice, so betrayal stayed small. He paid a chemist to keep the mix consistent. Not perfect, just reliable, and reliability became his brand. Customers felt the difference and stopped asking questions because the body doesn't argue with quality. Dealers whispered about a new stamp that didn't disappoint. While Bumpy's crew searched for the thief, Nicky poured money into discipline, not flash, because flash is confession and discipline is camouflage. Back in the lamplit room, Nicky watched Bumpy's watch hand move like a guillotine. He spoke fast, not frantic, the way you speak when every syllable costs. "Your product is 10%, he said. "Too many hands. Your people are skimming and hiding it with cut. Weak product makes noise. Noise brings badges, and badges bring indictments. I didn't come to you because the man who says it gets blamed for it." Bumpy's eyes stayed on him, unreadable. Nicky continued. "I built a cleaner channel with fewer hands and tighter routes. I took the 2 million because I needed capital and time, and because your rolling reserve was already a leak waiting for a thief." Bumpy didn't flinch at the word thief. He glanced at his watch, then back to Nicky. "That's your minute," he said. The silence after it felt like a verdict waiting to pick a shape tonight. Bumpy exhaled once, slow, and the room stayed quiet. No shouting, no teatro, no theater. He nodded like he'd just heard a clean report. "I'm letting you live," he said. Nicky felt the relief and hid it. Bumpy lifted a finger, cutting off any response. "But you pay for that life." He said the number like a weather forecast. 40%. Nicky's jaw tightened. "That's ownership." Bumpy shrugged. "That's mercy. You stole from me, and you're still standing." Nicky swallowed pride and took the only angle left. "You don't put your people in my kitchen," he said. "You take your cut and stay out." Bumpy watched him for a long beat, then nodded. "Fine. I stay out. You pay on time." He rose and opened the door himself, a dangerous courtesy. "And Nicholas," he added, "walk like you're building, not like you're winning, because everyone watches the man who walks." Spring arrived dirty, with slush turning to puddles, and Nicky's new line started breathing on its own. He kept the operation small inside and wide outside. Few hands, many corners. On Mondays, he met his chemist in a borrowed apartment and checked consistency like a banker checks signatures. On Wednesdays, he rotated couriers and burned old routes, even when it cost extra gas and nerves. Every Friday morning, before noon, 40% moved to Bumpy in pieces, a barber's safe, a church donation box, a shoebox under a sink, never the same pattern twice. Bumpy didn't send relatives to help, but his presence sat on Nicky's shoulder anyway, the way a heavy coat sits on you even when you stop noticing it. Customers stopped complaining. Dealers stopped improvising. That quiet drew attention. In New York, silence signals power. And when power shifts, old owners send men to measure the weight. 3 days later, outside Rouse in East Harlem, a man in a tailored coat waited by a Cadillac as if he owned the curb. His hands looked soft, but his eyes had done math. He didn't offer a name. Barnes, he said like a fact. Nicky kept walking until the man matched his pace. People say you got a cleaner line, he said. Nicky shrugged. People talk. The man smiled. The families listen. He listed them flat. Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese. They don't like surprises. They like stability. Nicky stopped and looked at him. I'm not selling fireworks, he said. I'm selling quiet. The man lowered his voice. Quiet costs rent. They want a meeting. Nicky gave him the shield. Tell them I already pay 40%, he said. The man's smile stalled, and his eyes blinked once, recalculating. Nicky didn't wait for an answer. He drove straight to his precaution. 2 nights later, Nicky walked into a back room behind a little Italy cafe alone. 3 men sat at a scarred table under a slow fan. No introductions. One man spoke, calm. You're moving product that's making people talk. Nicky sat without being invited. I'm moving quiet, he said. Another man leaned in. Quiet is expensive. What do you pay? Nicky let a beat pass. 40%. The room shifted. To who? The first man asked. Nicky kept his face flat. To Harlem. The third man, softer, said, So Bumpy owns you. Nicky shook his head. Bumpy spares me. There's a difference. He made his offer. Leave his structure untouched and the streets stay calm. Cops stay bored and everyone keeps earning. The first man studied him, then nodded once. For now, he said, like a handshake and a warning. Nicky walked out knowing peace was a kind of debt. April blurred into May. In 6 weeks, Nicky's weekly intake jumped from 20,000 to 70,000 because the product held and the pipeline stayed tight. In the Bronx, a nightclub owner paid him in a paper bag and asked for the quiet stamp by name. In Queens, a bodega back room became a drop spot. Rent paid in advance. Key held by nobody who lived there. A courier in a borrowed Pontiac made 3 runs in one evening. Each run 1 bundle. Each stop under a minute. Nicky kept the ledger in his head. Who touched it? Who owed him? Who owed Bumpy? 40% flowed uphill every Friday. He bought protection without muscle, paying for whispers. A courthouse clerk for docket talk, a bartender for faces, a switchboard operator for badge numbers. Each payment was small. Together they formed a wall made of information until the wall cracked. The crack began with ego, the quiet kind that whispers visibility won't hurt. A respected man died in Harlem, and the funeral drew every crew and every watcher with a camera. Nicky wore a new suit and stood near Bumpy just long enough to be noticed, telling himself funerals were safe because everyone pretends to mourn. He didn't see the rooftop lens catch his profile or the badge man writing time and place for a folder downtown. Days later, his oldest driver asked a question on the Willis Avenue Bridge. Why are we switching routes again? He said, trying to sound casual. Nicky answered flat. Because I said so. The driver nodded too fast. His eyes stayed forward too hard. Nicky felt the draft of betrayal, but he didn't move yet. Moving fast creates stories. Instead, he fed the driver a false drop and waited to see who repeated it, quietly. The echo came within a day. At the false drop, a laundromat on St. Nicholas. Nicky watched from a deli window as a sedan he'd never seen idled too long. Two men inside pretended to read, faking boredom like amateurs. His driver arrived, walked in, then walked out empty-handed, and the sedan stayed. When the driver turned the corner, one man stepped out and flashed a badge clip before sliding back into the car. Nicky drove away without a scene, because scenes become stories and stories become exhibits. He shut the kitchen for 48 hours and burned 2 routes. By sunset, he had replaced a courier, changed a stash key, and moved cash to an apartment. The net wasn't chasing product, it was studying habits. Even if he fixed the leak, the system now knew his rhythm. Once they learn your rhythm, they start the clock. And that clock hated second chances. Nicky contained the problem the way Bumpy expected, quietly. He smiled at the driver for 2 days, then handed him a bus ticket to Philadelphia with a fake job offer and a cash advance. The driver took it because greed believes any story that pays. 2 hours after the bus left, Nicky tipped an old warrant through a contact, the kind that holds a man without noise. The driver would sit, unable to call, unable to coordinate, unable to testify with confidence. For a moment, the air cleared. Then it tightened again. The system didn't need the driver anymore. It had patterns, photos from the funeral, and a courthouse clerk who stopped returning calls. Phones clicked in new places. Strangers parked too long. A polite cop asked Nicky's cousin for ID, just routine. Pressure arrived smiling, and it stayed because paperwork men don't get tired. They wait for mistakes from you. May 19th, 1968. 6:12 a.m. knocks hit Nicky's door in a rhythm that wasn't friendly. Agents entered with warrants and polite faces, turning drawers, lifting cushions, smiling when they found nothing worth headlines. One of them said, almost kindly, "This isn't the case. This is the calendar." After they left, Nicky drove to Bumpy, breaking etiquette because etiquette doesn't stop subpoenas. Bumpy listened without surprise. "This ain't Italians," he said. "This is the system." Nicky asked the real question. Would Bumpy let the families trade him for peace? Bumpy's eyes stayed calm. "You pay on time," he said. "I don't hand over profits for free." Then he offered a second deal. "Not money. Leverage. You give them a weak link," Bumpy said. "A name that buys air." Nicky hated it, but air is air. He offered one low-level associate already drowning in debt, and Bumpy nodded, approving the sacrifice quietly. For the rest of the summer, Nicky did the opposite of what legends do. He got smaller. He closed 2 apartments, paid runners to disappear, and sold routes to crews who didn't know his history. He stopped going to clubs and stopped standing in doorways where cameras could find him. The money dipped, but the heat dipped too, and that trade felt like survival. Every Friday, when the envelope was thinner, 40% still went to Bumpy, because missed payments are louder than gunshots. The families eased off, satisfied they'd been fed a bone. Agents kept calling names, but fewer answered. Nicky began sleeping in different beds, not for romance, for distance. He listened to the city again and understood the cruel arithmetic. Building an empire is easy compared to keeping it invisible. Power doesn't fall when you lose a fight. It falls when you become predictable in broad daylight. Years later, men argued about the 2 million like it was audacity, a wolf biting a king. The truth was colder. Bumpy knew his rolling reserve was vulnerable, because any machine with too many hands leaks. He watched it, waiting for the thief who would reveal the rot more clearly than any confession. When Nicky stole it clean, Bumpy saw insult, yes, but also proof. Competence in the thief and betrayal in the pipeline. Sparing Nicky wasn't softness. It was strategy. 40% turned a threat into revenue and turned a reckless climber into a controlled experiment. It also sent a message to Italians and cops. Harlem still had internal order, and order keeps outsiders cautious. Nicky learned the lesson the hard way. You can steal money once. You can even steal time. But freedom is different. Freedom is the only thing nobody lets you take without charging interest there.